You've heard the names together for years, a story that seems to resurface over and over. But now, with a massive release of court-ordered files, the connection between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, well, it's moved beyond just rumor and speculation. We now have a paper trail, and today, we're going to follow it. We're going to cut through all the noise, all the talking heads, and just focus on one simple question. What do the documents actually say? Okay, so here's our approach. We're going to trace this whole thing from the very beginning, the documented start of their relationship. Then we'll look at the public fallout, and finally, we'll get into what these recently released files have shown us. The goal here is simple. See where the paper trail leads, and maybe even more importantly, where it just stops. All right, let's start at the beginning. We're talking the late 1980s. New York, Palm Beach, the whole world of high society and power players. This is where the connection starts. And what's interesting is that the record from this time, it's actually pretty straightforward. So let's just lay out the facts from the early days because it paints a really clear picture of a very public friendship. You've got them as neighbors in Palm Beach back in 1987, with some accounts calling them best friends. Then there's literal video footage of them partying together at Mar-a-Lago in 92, Epstein's at Trump's wedding to Marla Maples in 93. I mean, this wasn't some secret relationship. It was all happening right out in the open, right up to that infamous 2002 magazine interview where Trump called Epstein a terrific guy. And this is where we get into some of the hard data, the paper trail. We're talking flight logs. The records show that between 1993 and 97, Trump was on Epstein's jet at least 7 times. The route was almost always the same, New York to Florida, back and forth. But what's really crucial here is what the logs don't show. For all that travel, there is no official record, no log of Trump ever going to Little St. James Island. And that omission, that silence in the records, is a huge part of this story. So after all those years of being seen together, everything just fractures. Around 2004, the whole public friendship falls apart. And this is where this single, clear narrative starts to get muddy. The paper trail becomes more complicated, and suddenly you have 2 very different stories about why they split. So what was the breaking point? Well, according to the documents, the catalyst wasn't what you might expect. It was business. In 2004, they both went after this massive mansion in Palm Beach, the Maison de l'Amitié. It turned into a serious bidding war. And in the end, Trump outbid Epstein. The records show that almost immediately after this business deal went sour for Epstein, their public friendship just ended. And right after that, Epstein gets banned from Mar-a-Lago. But why? This is where the stories really start to clash. Trump's version is that he found out Epstein was going after girls who worked at the club's spa. But then there's another version, this one coming from witnesses and club members, that claims Epstein harassed the daughter of a very prominent member, and that's what forced Trump to act. The key takeaway here is that the documents mention both versions, but they don't tell us which one is true. Fast forward just a few years to 2007, Florida police are now building their first investigation into Epstein. And Trump's public tune? It has completely changed. He reportedly tells investigators, quote, "Everyone knew Epstein was a creep." I mean, that's a total 180 from the terrific guy comment just 5 years earlier. A really stark reversal. Okay. Now, let's jump to the present day, or at least the last few years. After Epstein's death, these massive legal battles led to millions of pages of documents being unsealed, a huge data dump. So the big question is, what did this mountain of paper actually tell us about the Trump connection? Well, the new files definitely added some complicated layers. For starters, you have the Wolf tapes, where Epstein himself is recorded claiming he was Trump's closest friend. Of course, Trump's camp completely denies this. Then there are Department of Justice releases that seem to show continued contact between Epstein and some Trump associates, people like Steve Bannon, even after the public falling out in 2008. And finally, you had that whole weird incident with the lost photo of Trump, Melania, and Epstein that vanished from a government site for a bit, which just fueled all kinds of speculation before it was put back. So you can see, each new release just added another piece to this giant puzzle. So, after sifting through all of this, the early friendship, the fallout, the new files, what's the final verdict? What does the total body of evidence, including what's there and what's not there, really tell us? First, let's talk about scale. We are talking about over 3 million pages of documents from the Department of Justice alone. It's just a staggering amount of information. And yes, inside that mountain of paper, Trump's name does come up hundreds of times. But, and this is a huge but, context is everything. Most of these mentions are things like address books, old news clippings, or just witnesses mentioning his name in passing. And that brings us to what is probably the most crucial takeaway from this entire document review. Despite the hundreds of mentions, and despite their documented friendship, when you go through all 3 million pages, there is no direct evidence in these released files that links Donald Trump to any of Epstein's sex crimes. That is the finding from the documents themselves. So what we're left with is this fundamental contradiction. You have Epstein, on tape, claiming they were inseparable, that he was Trump's closest friend. And then you have Trump's story, which he's stuck to since 2004, that they were just social acquaintances who had a big falling out over a business deal. And what's wild is that the paper trail actually confirms elements of both stories. The friendship was real, and so was the fallout, but it can't reconcile these two completely different narratives. And that really brings us to the end of the paper trail, for now. Because even though millions of pages are now public, this story is nowhere near finished. The documents are covered in redactions, just blacked out lines that leave these huge gaps, these silences in the official record. Which leaves us all with one final and, I think, critical question. We've learned a lot from what's been unsealed, but what stories are still hiding behind all those black lines?